This is Ant Lions for Your Property Network magazine, and I'm doing another one of our short 10-minute videos today where we bring in our go-to people on specific subjects. So many of you might know, if you read the magazine or you watch some of the videos online, I do some developments and I run into all sorts of things which I just don't know. So on my panel of go-to people, and he's no stranger to the pages of YPN, he's been in development, it'd be fair to say, Richard, a few more years than I have. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Richard Little. So thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you, Ant, as ever.
What we want to do is just give a bit of a heads up on when people are appraising potential development sites or opportunities, the stuff that they miss out on, the kind of pitfalls, the stuff they just don't even think about. So what are some of the common mistakes that you think people make?
Okay, well, so we will always do what we call an initial appraisal. So it goes through things like looking at the land regs, looking at the flood risk, TPOs, etc. The very, very basic things. You'd be amazed how many people do not do that. But what probably find the biggest thing is we effectively sort of go from source, appraise, secure, but people tend to go from source to secure and then go to appraise. So they've done the deals probably too soon without doing the very, very basics. But yeah, over-egging the potential GDV or undercutting the prices, the build costs, you know, forgetting all of the other aspects, the professional fees, the developer contributions, even profit. I've seen profit missed off, you know, and yeah, being over optimistic on what they're going to get for funding, particularly people new to the market. Time-wise, everything's going to take 12 months. Doesn't matter how big the project is. It's 2 units, it's 102 units, it's 12 months. And that's so common. So contingency, which effectively don't put contingency in on cost or time. So that's something to be getting started with.
That's a starter, isn't it? I think that, you know, when you talk about the other costs, because when I talk to people, they're like, oh, okay, well, the land price or whatever it is, or the building price is this, and here's how much it's going to cost us to build. And then there is a whole chunk of other costs that they just miss out. They don't even think about, you know, and I know on some of ours, you know, cost of finance is £200,000 or £300,000. You know, your architect's fees, your legal fees, all of that. I did a rough calculation before we did this today, and on our last two projects, if I took the purchase price and then the build cost, our other costs are 25% of what we've already spent on the building and the development. I mean, that's big sums that people just don't see, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the growing pressure from the planners and the system now to produce more and more reports at an earlier stage and then go back and revisit it and maybe putting a second planning application in, and people don't get this. And you do need to engage with your professional team or your professionals, and, you know, they're not cheap, you know. Planning consultant might cost you £1,000 a day, depending on what they're doing for you. You know, an architect might be £400 or £500 a day, or even more. And it depends how big their ego is, but we won't go into that.
Well, it's very common, isn't it, for an architect to charge 5 or 6% of the project cost, of the build cost? And
yeah, we don't go there. You do not go there. You do not go as a percentage with the architect unless you've got some sort of other collaboration arrangement or something with them. We go on fixed fee and review.
Yeah, but even as a sort of, you know, fixed fee, it's a big number, isn't it? You know, you could
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at sites based on viability, which is something that's used quite a lot now, that's about to change, but used a lot when they're looking at affordable housing and things like that. We've got set percentages, so it's laid down by the RICS. So the accepted percentage of professional fees on a project is 10% ish. Depends how big. The bigger the project, the lower the fees are, the lower the percentage are. People underestimate the cost of an asbestos report or an arsenic report and things that they don't think, oh, don't even know I need one of them.
Well, and even on the asbestos side of things, you know, if you're buying a building that you're going to convert, you can't actually really go in and do an invasive survey until you own the thing, can you? So if you're trying to sort of base that on, okay, well, we'll find out all of this stuff before we buy it, some of it is at risk, isn't it?
It is. I sort of don't quite agree with that, though, if you pardon me.
No, I'm more than happy to be disagreed with. Yeah,
we primarily do new builds. We would not buy a building that we hadn't done an intrusive survey on. Now, because we just wouldn't. And there is, people will add obviously a certain bit more contingency on a conversion, but it sort of annoys me when people come up and say, oh, it's a conversion, you don't really know what it's going to cost. You should do. There are some unknowns, but people take too much risk. So effectively, that's one of the real big reasons we won't touch conversions. But unless somebody's prepared to let you do an intrusive survey, then how serious are they about you buying it?
We've got one at the moment. It's a hotel. He's operating it as a hotel at the moment. So trying to get in and do an intrusive survey is tricky.
But ultimately, what we will do is we will keep pushing back on that, and actually, we always be the strongest thing, whether you're in appraisal or whatever, is the ability to say no, and that's probably one of the other things that I find that people don't do, because it's much easier apparently psychologically to say yes than it is no. And certainly people new to the industry, they get their asking price is massaged up, shall we say, by experienced vendors often. How often are people buying a site or a building off of a developer? Yeah, we've been around, we know how to sell stuff. Somebody said to me, I'm quite new to the industry development, do I smell new? And I thought it was a great expression, and I thought, well, actually, yeah, you do. And that's another reason with the costs. Costs are often hiked up because people smell new. They can't justify it because sometimes they need a lot more hand holding. So they sort of think these are going to be a lot more work. So that all the way through to main contractor costs.
I think it's a really good point, because actually, if you haven't got a lot of experience and there's a QS with a principal contractor and he's telling you these are the costs, and you just wouldn't have the experience and the depth of knowledge to know any different, would you? You just wouldn't have a clue. So, and I thought you made a really interesting point earlier on about how the psychology of us pushing our end values up as well, of the GDV of the site, and I would guarantee that every single person who's ever done any kind of property transaction has done this to a degree, where you say, well, I think it's worth 350, and 350 is nearly 360, and that's nearly 380. So all of a sudden, you've jumped every unit by 30 grand, and I might be stretching the number slightly, but probably not by that much.
Oh, no. 10% is a bit of a yardstick where we see stuff come in, and you sort of say, right, okay, we just do some quick checks. Because we don't, basically, when anything comes on our desk, we don't believe what anybody's told us because we can't afford to, so we'll check everything, and unbelievable what we get. Certainly with GDVs or what people would like them to be.
If you're doing a new build and you're creating something which is kind of, let's say it's different to, it's not your kind of vanilla boxes that we see popping up from the big developers, it's more bespoke. There's probably, in a sort of 5-mile radius, very little to compare it to. So how do you go about your process of saying, well, this is what we're going to be selling them for?
Yeah, so we can go to any part of the country and get a comparable. So say you've got one, I don't know, let's say Bristol, really ultra modern, we can't find anything the same. Well, we could go to London and get a comparable. So effectively the way that works, we'll look at something that we can see in Bristol that there are lots of. How much is that? How much is this equivalent in London? And what's the difference between that equivalent in London and the one that's like we're going to build? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then we'll just wind that back. So, at an extreme, we can compare a 2-bed terraced house on Dartmoor with a lighthouse and off of the tip of Scotland. We wouldn't be doing that. We wouldn't need to do it. But we can get comparables anywhere about anything. We check all that stuff, and all of our appraisal stuff in terms of the numbers are ranges. They're from one to another. Which unit in which block, because they'll all have a different value or have potentially have different values. We'll price every unit up. No matter if it's 4 units or 400 units on the basis of what it is, its position in the block or whatever. And those small percentages make a lot of difference when we're actually doing the appraisal, either working for us or against us. We see too much conforming to standards, I suppose, it was so much a square foot. That's
I was just about to come into that one. It must be a bugbear, because I see it asked on a number of groups that I'm a member of, and I'd probably asked it myself. Say, well, what are you working on per square metre or per square foot? And I've probably been shot down in flames by yourself before in the past on that one, Richard.
I think you might have done once about some bungalows, I do
I
believe.
might have done, yeah. I lost track of the number of times I've been shot down in flames.
I think it was along the lines, and this is typical, and it might not have been you, so forgive me, but it's sort of thing.
I'm sure it wasn't.
I know you can't tell me how much, but can you give us an idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to put numbers out there, pretty much for anything, just by a sort of, just a bit of a look. But it'll be a range of numbers. So like new build, we've got people that are completing new builds, not much more than £800 a square metre. And there'll be people watching this saying that's impossible. It might be possible for you that's watching it, that's questioning it, but for the people who are doing it, it's not, because they're doing it. And that's a lot to do with being a lead developer. It's understanding the process from start to finish. In terms of the appraisal, ultimately we begin with the exit in mind. What's demand, but for what? So all the way through on the number side, we work on a range. But yeah, how much is it going to cost? So we know with a new build, to an extent, once we've done all the ground investigation, we know what it should cost. What it will cost and what it does cost is not always the same, but we know what it should cost.
And why can that happen then? That's something that's really an interesting point. So we know what it should cost, and there can be a real difference between what it should cost and what it does cost. So what can cause such a differential between the two?
Generally, the developer changing the spec, changing something. Not always, but that's where we see the biggest thing. And again, particularly people that are getting new into it, they want to put their own stamp on the properties that they're actually putting together. To an extent, in the spec-in, it's all about value engineering and stuff, and saying, right, okay, we want to produce something. And there's differences if you are, if you're developing to the PRS or you're developing to your own portfolio. We're about life cycle costing then. What can we spend now that will save us money, moving forward?
And as a final point, and I know this is just the first in a series of these videos that I'm going to twist your arm into doing with us. So agents, they can be a massive asset at a very early stage in terms of advising on the project. How do you identify the good from the bad? Because they can be really, really different in the service they provide and their experience. So what are you looking for?
Even in the same office. You'll get somebody that's good. The person that signs you up to get your instruction is normally not the person that's actually going to be dealing with your clients, your customers, or whatever going through. So we'll always look for a national agent. We'll look for somebody that's strong regionally and also an independent local if you can. And we'll talk to 3 of them at the very least. And then ultimately, it's about how you feel about those agents. Where there's lots of questions we can ask them. We'll always be testing, but there is a bit of a reputation with agents. But agents are fantastic. We can't work without them, and they get a hell of a lot of bad press. The biggest thing that we do that most people don't do. So all the agents that have to watch this, cover your ears. We'll offer them more money. We'll always, all the way through, we'll incentivize in some way, because what we see is, and I know why it happens, is when you get towards the end of the project and people start then engaging agents, but as you rightly said, our agents are on board at the appraisal stage often, before we're secured, because their information is absolutely vital for us. And so people come in at a late stage when they've already overspent, so they want to cut down on the agency fees. Your project is not a success, certainly if it's for sale, until they're sold and the money's in the bank. Why don't you incentivize your salesman instead of cutting them down for 1.5 to 1.25 or whatever? Really, really wrong move, guys. Say to them, I don't know, if their standard rate's 1.25%, for instance, we'll say, right, one of the things we'll want to say, well, if we bring anybody to the table, we'll still pay you, but we'll probably pay you a reduced, maybe 0.75% or something. But if we were to pay you another 0.5%, what else could you do for us? And one of the things that they'll often do is, even it might be a small development, but they'll attend the show unit for you, a few hours a week, because it's mobile office, they can sit there, because they're normally used to being cut back on their budget. So it's a case saying, if you had a bit more, what would you do? And of course, if the agent's selling your units and somebody else's units, and they're getting 1.5 or 1.75 for your, and only 1 or 1.25 for the person that screwed them to the floor for the price because they're a big shot developer, who do you think they're going to put forward first?
The extra money that we spend, small, 0.25%, whatever it is almost certainly saved in terms of, us, the holding costs of not sitting on that property to try and sell it for another 6 months or 4 months or whatever it's going to be, with finance costs and everything else tied up in it. So I think sometimes, spend a little bit of money, I guess, and, you actually end up making a bit more.
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're reducing the risk. Everything we do is about, maximising margin, yes, but reducing risk. It's all about delivering your project, when you've actually secured it, etc. And it's all about the people that deliver. And if you can incentivize them the same way. So the other mistake I see, and big style this, is, we live in a world of leverage, and it's a fantastic thing. It's not always a fantastic thing, because people lose interest. Oh, they've done this deal, they've got 8 units, they're now doing another deal. They've lost interest in the sale and they're pushing it through. And as soon as you lose interest as a developer, you bet your bottom dollar everybody else has lost interest as well. So that's why we see a lot of units hanging, the last few units, because the lead developer doesn't push through. You've got to be active all the way through. Well, our view, you've got to be active all the way through. Okay, brilliant advice. And I know there's loads more topics that I do want to cover with you, but we're going to have to do them some other videos where I can steal a little bit more of your time. So if people are watching this video and they perhaps interested in learning a bit more from yourself or the team, how can they get in contact? Brindley, my son, and myself started Property Developers Academy, so you can find us on Facebook or a website. So, and if you have liked listening to Richard today, then head on to yourpropertynetwork.co.uk/start. We're going to put some of the articles that he's been kind enough to write for Your Property Network magazine on there, so they'll be available to download as well as some of the contact details. And it's been an absolute pleasure being schooled. So you were very gentle on me today, so thank you. A pleasure, Anne. Thank you very much. See you again soon. Take care. Bye.